Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Vince Staples called FM. You know, at this point I think a lot of folks have just given up on predicting where Vince Staples is going to go next. Hell, that came up even for me when I reviewed his last album, Big Fish Theory, where instead of following off the minimalist West Coast knock of Summertime '06 from 2015, he yanked pretty much everything to the left with some of the most electronic and warped production this side of hip house for a more brutal, borderline nihilistic deconstruction of that party scene that Vince Staples seemed to view with equal parts dispassionate contempt, mischievous glee, and dead serious urgency. Now for me, I've always dug into the subtle complexities in Vince Staples' messaging, taking what some might consider the sick jokes underlying certain parts of hip-hop and society and culture, and making them just uncomfortable enough and real to throw some ignorant white audiences for a loop if they start paying attention. But what's always frustrated me is that, like Earl Sweatshirt, he's got a real skill in boiling things down with real bluntness, but unlike Earl, the songs on both a compositional and deeper lyrical level could feel a little undercooked. The hard messages, the nuance was there, but the hooks and themes as a whole never quite coalesced to really drive it home for me. And thus, I won't really deny that I was thrown for a loop when Vince Staples decided to drop a brutally short surprise album pretty much out of nowhere, taking the format of FM radio as a backdrop to smuggle in a collection of bangers that he said were more direct and focused than ever, hitting that difference between his studio releases, which, okay, to some might reflect a pivot away from the experimentation towards more of an accessible, conventional sound, and some might see that as misspent potential, but that could be the archetype and foundation for what Vince Staples needs to cross over. And besides, given how short it was, I was up for something that was kind of brutal and direct after a year full of double and triple albums in hip-hop. So alright, what do we get out of FM? Well, I've said before that Vince Staples projects, they resist easy analysis. That it's very easy to dismiss them on the first half dozen or so listens as just more hard-living hip-hop posturing, just with much more of a sharp, nihilistic bent that can get uncomfortably real at spots. Hell, even despite the wild production choices on Big Fish Theory, it might even seem to fit into that range when you start digging into the content. And so with FM, even further streamlined to just over 20 minutes with 3 interludes, you could easily be deceived to think that there's just not much to even get with this project. And then miss the much darker underlying point that Vince Staples managed to slide in between the lines, where the project almost demands to be considered as a singular album statement, and really going back through it a number of times, a pretty damn great one that you should all hear. So let's start off with that album statement. And keep in mind that, like with all of his projects, there's a level of hard-bitten, realistic subversion that Vince brings to this. He's not glamorizing anything here, and the key to getting it, it's almost so obvious that you can be forgiven for missing it. The radio. See, peppered across the album are snippets to make this album sound like it's being played on the radio in its entirety, specifically from the LA radio show Bad Boys Neighborhood, with snippets of banter in between songs, interludes announcing tour dates and new music for other artists altogether, most notably here from Tyga and Earl Sweatshirt, a call-in snippet that could seem like a humorous aside before the pitch-dark conclusion of the album, even the sounds of the fuzz bookending the project as somebody tunes in and then tunes away from the station. And while plenty of hip-hop artists have used cut-in radio segments before, especially in the skits that flourished in the 2000s, and almost always used as a quick shout-out to build some hype for the artist with a quick guest star popping in, there's something more decidedly normal about how they're placed and arranged here, almost as if they aren't really part of an album at all. And then you notice that nearly every single song is set up showing the same sort of brutally realistic gang violence that's uncomfortable, the bleak paranoia, the poverty, the desperate hustle. There's a uniformity of content that otherwise hasn't shown up on a Vince Staples project, especially as it seems to have some of his catchiest ever hooks, which is even more discombobulating. And yet, throughout all that, Big Boy never really comments on the content of the material beyond some cursory reference to titles in order to string together some transitions. It's almost as if he doesn't recognize or care about all the bloodshed running through all these songs, and a body count that seems to get higher with every single track. And then you get to the call-in number skit at the very end of the album, where Big Boy challenges Christian, subtle, to name 7 people whose names start with V, and he doesn't name Vince Staples. In fact, Vince Staples' name is never uttered once across the entire project, to only further highlight a sense of ignored anonymity. But there are some names mentioned here, friends and family who have died around Vince Staples in his real life, memorialized in his song, but the radio around him doesn't seem to pay any mind. They don't seem to care, and why would they? Why would those names matter to a predominantly white audience who wouldn't pay attention to anything besides the beat and flow anyway? And if you've gotten to the blunt point that Vince Staples is making, he's not exactly being subtle. On both Feels Like Summer and Don't Get Chipped, Vince Staples doesn't hesitate to highlight a white audience who will vibe and sing along to every bloody line while ignoring the humanity who died beneath it, because they're allowed to ignore it by a system and society that strips away larger context and desensitizes that audience through banal repetition on the radio or streaming playlists and a refusal to engage more deeply with it. But for Vince Staples, who lives it, it's survival. It's why the acronym FUN becomes fuck up nothing. It's how morbid the verse of No Bleedin' becomes as he shouts out his dead homies as if they're alive. That's how on the final song Tweakin, the only point where real melancholy is allowed to seep into the entire album and bring down the mood, Vince acknowledges he's got a face, he's got a name now, people might remember him, but in the trap, all his friends are dead, so he can't quite help them. And even that name will be ignored on the album, even as the song title shouted out at the end, as the radio just cycles on to that next big hit. And here's the unsettling thing. Vince Staples did all this while probably making his most methodically solid, melodic, catchy album to date, with the production fitting snugly into accessible West Coast trends with the grimy program beats, the seedy keyboards, and an abundance of melodic hooks. And while it's easy to point at Dolla, who's having a great year, sounding as good as ever on Feels Like Summer, to J-Rock stepping into the melancholy of Don't Get Chipped and acknowledging the mental illness that might lurk underneath and has not been addressed, I gotta give points to Vince himself for delivering some of his most consistent and well-structured flows to date with a fair amount of melody in their own right. Still as eerie and minimalist as Summertime '06, maybe not quite as bleak or brittle, but it fits. But from the off-key whistles of Feel Like Summer and Don't Get Chipped, the washed-out plucky sample of the Nyan Cat for Outside to highlight the ghoulish juxtaposition and pushing this material to kids, the wiry warping bombast of Relay, the gothic organ dripping behind Run the Bands, the blubbery knock of Fun with that great sleigh bell and a nice E40 feature, even down to the desaturated bleakness of Tweakin' with Buddy and Kehlani, there's more consistent melody and hooks than Vince Staples has ever had to date, and that does him a lot of credit in bringing it all together. Hell, given how streamlined the project is, it gives me precious room to criticize anything. But if I am gonna nitpick something, it's fairly minor. I would have replaced Tyga with literally any other West Coast MC on that little interlude. I mean, come on, you don't have a problem working with Bloods given J-Rock is here. YG would have been ideal for that interlude, especially given his content. It would have fit. And the part of me that was thrilled to see Earl Sweatshirt show up at all wishes we could have gotten more than just 20 or so seconds from him. And while I'm nitpicking guest performances, there is a part of me that thinks that Tweakin' could have hit a little bit harder if it was just Vince Staples to intensify that loneliness. And I do wish both E40 and Kamaya had connected some of their verses to the underlying ideas within each of their songs. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't sound bad, but they could have tied it together just a little tighter. But yeah, stepping away from this, I found myself a little startled how much this album connected with me on a thematic level, especially in a way that neither Summertime '06 or Big Fish Theory did. The songs are still chock full of really raw, really uncomfortable details, but nothing that distracts or pulls away from the larger theme and picture. The hooks, they're better than ever. And the fact that Vince Staples squeezed all this into 22 harrowing minutes is genuinely impressive in the best way possible. And yeah, it goes without saying that it bangs hard, but the fact that it forces the audience to confront the consequences and reality behind that banging along with way, it got me much in the same way that similar loaded subtext filled Pusha T's Daytona from earlier this year, and works just about as well. Rising to that echelon of greatness, it's sending an 8 out of 10 from me. Absolutely a recommendation. Folks, it's 22 minutes. You've got no excuse not to hear this. It's Vince Staples at his most focused, most catchy, and most cutting. And yeah, don't touch that dial. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised how much I like this, but yeah, there's really a lot going on within this project. A lot of little details, a little bit of layers to really throw you up and make you kind of feel uncomfortable, but in the right way. So yeah, you want to buy or stream it, highly recommend. Links down there below. Got the poll up there, so if y'all want to tell me how much you like it or don't. This album's getting weird reviews, so we'll see how things turn out. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel so I could have covered this earlier, link to my Patreon right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details, link down over there. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.
No boo brunch, no big change.